invested in over 4,000 units at this point. As an LP, you've been a GP or KP on 700 units at this point. Talk to me about how you've managed to do that while holding down a full-time job.
Well, uh, high energy, low IQ, I guess. But on a serious note, when I first got involved in multifamily, and I think what really drew me to it was when I began to understand the financing of it, and also the ability of non-recourse agency loans and others where I didn't have to sign personally on a multi-million-dollar asset, and that just fascinated me, is because at the heart of it, I'm a finance guy, and I got started very simply by becoming a passive investor. I found people that I trusted and liked at some of those educational groups, and I invested in their properties, and I became a little sponge and asked them, can I help you? Can I go on due diligence with you? Can I, sit on the property management call? And so as I would work that into my day schedule, my opportunities, it just became much more of a learning curve for me, a much more beneficial learning curve. And then about 2018, we did our first general partnership or first sponsorship, and had that opportunity, and that was successful, and enjoyed that. And so I don't do as much limited partner today, but I tell you what I do is I take a lot of my money from my self-directed IRA and use it as a limited partner, just because I like the returns and the safety of that much better than the stock market. So.
Yeah. I think that's a great insight, though, on how to get started, right? It may seem simple, but it's really straightforward. And it's important to understand, like, hey, this is a team sport. And if you don't have the time or the knowledge right now, when you're networking and joining these different groups, think about investing passively. And that's a great way to get started. Get some traction, but you don't have to just give them your money and then wait for the email updates and hope it goes well. You can ask them, hey, I'd like to learn. Can I be on a call? Can I walk the property with you? Can I understand more about the underwriting? You can use that as an opportunity to learn more about the deal, the process, get more comfortable for yourself, if it is, in fact, that you want to be active at some point in the future. So I think it's really cool that you were able to do that, invest in different deals, gain more experience and knowledge, get more comfortable on the behind the scenes of what it takes to be a GP on a deal, and then ultimately transition to being a general partner and doing more of those GP and KP type deals. When you were making that transition from your standpoint, what was like the biggest challenge or the biggest hurdle that you weren't anticipating since you had been an LP only up to that point?
Well, the biggest one for anybody that's finance background is the checks get bigger. As you know, you're putting upfront money down, at risk capital to get the deal. Earnest money, hard money, whenever you decide to make it first, especially the legal firms, financing, loan application, et cetera, et cetera. So the checks got bigger. That was my biggest hurdle. And, you're just going all in at that perspective. But I say the value of that is partnerships, and right. It's don't go it alone. Find somebody that you trust that complements your skill sets, and joint venture with somebody to syndicate a deal. You don't have to go alone your first one. I had 3 partners on my first one, and I'm thoroughly convinced that I don't want to go one alone, unless maybe someday when I get have much more spendable net income than I do net worth today. But that's the way to go, is to use those relationships that you build to partner with. I was a finance guy. My first deal, I really partnered with a guy that was really a fantastic marketer. He was wonderful. And I can do that, but it's not my sweet spot. It's not what I necessarily enjoy. And another guy was a broker. And so, we took down a 139 unit deal, and turned out we sold it 21 months later and 2x'd everybody's money.
Love it. That's great to hear, man. It's great. It's great too when you talk about how you formed a partnership, knowing your background, you had a strong finance background, aligned yourself with somebody with a marketing background, somebody else who was a broker and had that commercial real estate experience. And together you could go out there and take down a larger deal, 139 unit, execute, turn around in 21 months and exit and deliver a 2x return to your investors. I think it's just incredible, right? And the lessons for me, or the lessons for the audience here, is that one, always be open to partnerships if you're looking to scale and you don't have that kind of track record or experience. But
Yeah.
also make sure you're educating yourself and networking your butt off, right? Connecting with people so that you have the resources around you to fill in the gaps for areas where maybe you don't have a super skill there. And I think that's something that you were able to do with those deals. How did you come across those guys? Was it in the networking group, or did you meet them somewhere else?
Well, it was really through one of the educational arms, the Sumrock group at the time, and we're both the other guy and I were based in Houston, so we'd have to drive 4.5 hours to Dallas to meetings, and so we got to
Mm-hmm.
spend a lot of time, windshield time in the car, and getting to know each other, and so that's really how that one came about. And it was, I mean, the other thing beauty about that is you realize seldom do people have the balance sheet to cover the equity requirements within an agency loan on their own. So you get to pool your resources together. You're leveraging. Uh, the only advice I would say is my current mentor, Rod Khalif, would say, partnerships are like a marriage. They're easy to get into, but expensive and very painful to get out of. So choose wisely is the lesson there.
Yeah, we'll talk about that a little bit more for sure. So for that person who's listening, right, maybe have not done a real estate deal, and or maybe you've done some real estate, but maybe not the larger multifamily stuff. Would you recommend starting as an LP investor, or do you think there's a better strategy to get going?
So I coach a lot of people today in the Khalif organization, and they want to start out with five single families or two single families or even a duplex or a quad or something. And that's their comfort zone. And I fully understand that. But I would say push yourself, because there's as much work to do in a 150 unit apartment complex as there is a 15 unit or a 10 unit. It's just shared, and there's more zeros at the end of it. But yes, I go with your comfort wherever that is, but I would encourage you to go multifamily sooner rather than later for all the reasons we've talked about, just agency debt, non-recourse loans, partnership arrangements, et cetera, et cetera.
No, I love it. And Randy, you started talking about the partnerships, right? And that's something that is easier said than done. Like you said, it's easy to just say, hey, let's go find a partner. You found some good partners to do that deal and have that great results. But there are also some challenges there. So talk to me more about maybe some of the things that you ran into with your partnerships that you had to learn to figure out how to navigate.
So, I mean, just so the audience knows, we did that one deal together and we were very successful, and we've never done a deal together again. And that's okay. I'm currently working with another group of guys, and I personally am seeking partners in many different arenas on different deals. So I think you don't have to worry about just one, but you got to do one to get started, right? But I think I look back at that, and it was a very beneficial relationship how we met, and we were equally yoked, as they say, and we had the same interests and desires. But they don't last forever. Even the ones that I know are the most successful, and some of the bigger ones, because our functions were different, finance and marketing. A finance person with background is generally, by nature, generally speaking, very risk adverse and says no 4 out of 5 times. A marketing person, generally speaking, and I don't mean to offend anybody, but generally says, just do the deal. We'll do the deal. We'll worry about those details in the back end. And there's natural differences there that occur that you have to work through, but it's all
Yeah,
good. And
yeah, I think it's interesting, right? Because I am a marketing guy, and that is not my take normally. So we were
I hope I
probably
didn't offend you.
no, you're not offending me. The thing for me is, as the marketing guy, it helps me to actually be, I don't want to say more conservative, but to act more like the finance guy, right? Because
Yeah.
you can talk yourself into stuff, right? If you look at
Oh
something
yeah.
long enough, you can start talking yourself into it. And I think it's important to understand the story of a deal or an opportunity, but the numbers got to support it. And that's what gives me the most confidence, right? The numbers are there to support everything else we're
Yeah.
looking at. But I think your larger point is, from a partnership standpoint, everybody's got a different lens. They've
Yeah.
got a different set of experiences. They have different goals. They have different risk tolerance. And that's going to be the same with your investors. So I think it is really important to have
Yeah.
those partnerships where you have different POVs, but you can come together and talk through those things, right? And now it's a matter of, okay, if this, then what will we do? Right? If this happens, what do we do? And that way you understand, like you put some contingency plans in place. In every successful partnership or company, you have these different roles, right? Because you're going to need a little bit of
Sure.
friction so that you can actually create a better product at the end. So I think that's really good. But you made a point about sometimes those partnerships are just for one deal. Sometimes you go on to do multiple deals together as well. And for someone who is thinking about jumping into a partnership today, is there one insight or one lesson that you would advise them on so that they can ensure that they are selecting the right partner for them, for their goals and for their investing criteria?
Well, I think the most important thing for me when I look at partners is very simply the number one thing is trust. Do you trust them? Uh, you're going to be investing a lot of your money and asking other people to invest, and just it's sister. And that's not a quantitative thing that you can get your head around. So you got to just spend time with them and break bread over coffee or lunch, dinner, and wherever. But you got to get to know them. And then I would say the second thing is educated. Are you at the same spot? So if somebody's got 4,000 doors as a GP, they're probably not going to want to partner with me, with all due respect. So are you at the same spot, and are you at the same educational level? And so if you're in one of those big educational groups, and there are many across the country, wherever you're at, I mean, I mentioned several here in the Southwest, but
Mm-hmm.
there's Jake and Gino and Michael Blanc and Mark Kenny and several other groups like that. If you're in one of those groups, you're probably better likely to find somebody that you're have more things in common with. You have the same approach to this that educational arm is teaching, and then you can quickly realize that there's many different ways to do a deal. There's
Yeah.
many different ways to do a deal.
Absolutely. I like that point too, because, figure out where your circle is. And if you're already a part of a group, and it doesn't have to be one of those big groups, it could be even, online groups. If you're in different
Yeah,
Facebook groups, or you're in, going to RIAs or meetups or things like that, figure out where that community is. And then, by being a part of that community makes it easier to find a potential partner. And I think your biggest point is that trust is so key. I mean, you've got to trust that partner, and people change, things change, goals change, but you have to ultimately understand who that individual is at the core and whether or not you can trust them. So really great insight right there, Randy, on selecting a partner to do these deals. You mentioned that you were part of these different groups, right? You mentioned about 3 or 4 different groups. I'm
sure.
curious, what was the rationale in going from maybe the first group to the second group to the third group? It seems like most people kind of, pick one group and stay there and then maybe go off, but you've kind of moved to
Yeah,
different groups. I'm curious of what drove that decision.
that's a good question. I don't know. Maybe I'm just stubborn, or maybe I'm like, again, high energy and low IQ. But I think I started at Lifestyles here in Houston, and I just, with all due to respect, most of these groups are a pay to play arrangement. So you have to join their coaching or their mentorship program. And at that season of my life, I was unwilling to put down $25,000, $30,000 to even, I mean, Lifestyles at that time, I don't know what they're like today. You had to be what was called a preferred investor member to even get passive deals to look at. And that would cost you $25,000 to $30,000. I could have done that if I really wanted to, but there was, and when I started going to other entities, podcasts, and I mentioned the Sumrock Group, I started to see more deals without paying that money. And I was just of the strong opinion that it was too early for me to put down that kind of money, because I didn't know if I was going to stay, or thought I was, but who knows? Life changes. And so I like the Sumrock Group. Quite honestly, I just got tired of traveling to Dallas, 4.5 hours away, 5, 6 times a year. And that was really the impetus for changing there. And then I got involved in Khalif's group when I spoke with him at a networking conference. And he was just, we hit it off very well. And I'm in his mastermind today, and we attend, he has 3 or 4 masterminds a year at different places around the country. And so I get more out of that today, talking to people that are better than I am, or being more bigger, successful, whatever you want to call it. But I like to hang around people that are better and bigger than I am.
No, I think those are great insights because we change as people, right? And your goals change as you get more knowledgeable, as you have access to different resources. What you were doing last year may no longer fit what you plan on doing this year or next year. So I think it's okay to change who you surround yourself in and change
Yeah.
that network. And it sounds like that's exactly what you've done. I like that you talked about, the season you were in. You weren't ready to pay that $25,000 initially, but ultimately, I know now you're kind of coaching and helping other people as well. Can you just talk to me about maybe that investor journey? Because you probably come across people all the time
Yeah.
who are considering paying for coaching or hiring a
Yeah.
coach or a mentor. And, you've been through that journey yourself. So, what are some of the things you would advise someone if they're sitting there saying, hey, I'm thinking about hiring a coach, I'm not sure if I'm ready? What would you tell them, or how would you help them make that decision?
Well, I think the number one most important thing any investor do is education. So whether you're a part of a large national group or you're a part of, you're just following all the local meetups and podcasts, there's yours is a great one. There's others as well, where when I started in 2014, the podcast scene hadn't really taken off yet. And so there's just so much free information out there today. And so I think the journey it just depends on what you want to do. I mean, I remember when I became a GP and they told me you have to define your avatar investor. And I simply said, well, anybody that got money. But the more, and I make fun of that today, but the more focus I got and I began to refine that as to who I was really trying to attract as an investor, the more successful I became because I targeted, in your marketing world, I targeted my customer or my investor very specifically in what I was doing too. So I think education is the most important thing they can do. And wherever you're at, I'm John, I'm sure you're still going to networking opportunities. And whether you've been doing this 1 year or 15 years, you're still learning and you're still going to those network opportunities. And I think there's no single investor that I've met that there's not a blueprint. When I get on these calls with new students, they're looking for a 12-step process to growth, to wealth, I should say. And I said, it can happen in 3 or it could happen in 50. Just depends on how fast you want to go and how committed you are. And quite honestly, multifamily is a capital gain. So you got to have some money. It's not like flipping houses where you can no money down syndrome. So I don't think there is a single journey for any investors per se. I encourage people to start out as that passive one because that's the path of least resistance. And you can get into. People say to me, "Well, I don't have 50,000 or 75,000." I had that wherewithal at the time, but my first one I did it in a partnership. So a buddy and I split the 50K because I wanted to put my toes in the water and gain comfort with the process before I really wrote my own $50,000. So there are multiple ways to get into it. And if you want to go right in and say I don't want to be a passive, I want to do a duplex, a triplex, or a tenplex, whatever, that's cool too. But you probably won't be able to articulate that back to like me and my avatar investor. You probably won't be able to articulate that until you've spent time in the networking and educating yourself. And the more
Yeah,
you do that, you'll refine it.
I think that's very helpful because when you talk about your goals, I mean, you've got to understand what you're trying to get out of it. And, where you were at before, you weren't quite ready, but you took in information, you educated yourself. And as you got further down that journey, I think you became ready, right? And I think your goals are really important. You have to figure out what you want and what's the best path to get there. And that's just it. I mean, whether you pay for coaching, whether you hire a mentor,
Right.
listen to podcasts, whatever you do, invest passively, it's not to say one strategy is the right strategy or the wrong strategy. It's just to say you've got to figure out the best way you learn, the best way you're going to see success and results. And yeah, that's the way you want to think about it for your business is understanding how you learn best. Do you need to get some skin in the game? And, how will it be 3 steps or 50 steps? Like you said, it depends on the individual, but knowing yourself is really key in that process too. The one thing I tell people is you kind of want to know what problem you're trying to solve. Mentors are not magicians. So if you're going to work with one or hire one, be clear on what you're hoping to get out of it. Kind of
Right.
like you said early on when you were an LP, it wasn't just, hey, I want an 8% return. It was, hey, I want access to toward the property. I want to learn due diligence. I want to get a peek behind the curtain so I can be more informed on what it takes to
Exactly.
be an investor, right? And if you've got that kind of clarity, now you can understand when it makes sense to hire a mentor, right? What are you trying to do? Hey, I'm trying to figure out how do I increase my investor database?
Right.
Or I'm trying to figure out how to perform due diligence the right way on the property so I don't make a mistake, right? So I think those kind of insights make it easier for someone to say, okay, I know what I need, because a podcast and book and those things are great, but they can only go so far. At some point, you need
Yeah.
some real world experience if you really want to be an investor. So that's really key. I want to talk a little bit more about that, Randy, right? So
Okay.
you've built this portfolio, right? 4,000 LP units, 700 GP units there. So you've got a nice amount of experience at this point. And I know every deal can't be a home run. So I want to talk about your best deal. And as you might expect, after that, we're going to talk about your worst deal. But let's start with the best deal. What was the best deal you've
You
done?
had to bring that up, didn't you, John? So there's two I point to as the best deal. I'll call one was a grand slam, and the other one was just a solid home run. So the first one I got in as an LP investor, small 99 unit property in Beaumont, Texas, which is about, for your listening audience, about 100 miles due east of Houston on I-10, and it's a city of about 200,000 blue collar community. We bought this property, and about, I don't know, 8 months, 9 months into it, it flooded, took out all the first floor units. And so we had just started to receive distributions, and it flooded, and, thinking, oh, crap. Fast forward, they rebuilt all the units. They sold it, not one, not two, not three, but a 4X multiple in about 26 months. So that's what I call
Wow.
a grand slam.
And when was that?
That was in 2019.
Okay. Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah. Yeah. It was just bought right. And it was a classic example. They bought it from a guy who had owned it for 25 years and really ignored it, and had a property manager, and just deal you salivate for today.
Yeah.
They're not around very often. And then the second one was my first GP I mentioned, that it happened to be 139 units. It was also in Beaumont, Texas. And that one becomes good and bad. We sold it, I said, 21 months later at 2X. The bad on that was that 2 months into ownership, I'm sitting in my office in Houston. I get this call from the property man. They said, Randy, the building's on fire. What? Because I always knew that was going to happen sooner or later, but I didn't think it was going to happen 2 months into it. So good news, nobody hurt. We ended up having a fire. We ended up having to can the property manager. I got real heavily involved, became basically the regional manager, and doing a lot of work, spent a lot of time. I got a new firm in there, sold it 21 months later. But that's not the worst story. Real quickly, my first or second LP investment was I put in $50,000 to a guy I liked and trust, and it was in Port Arthur, Texas, which is a little further east than Beaumont. Harvey. So the first thing, so this is a business, and people have to remember it's a business. So there was fraud. The property manager had committed fraud. There was a flood that took out all the first floor units again, and that's the same one, Harvey. Then there was a fire, and regrettably, 3 young children were died.
Oh,
And about that time, the property went into technical default with the bank. And we had gotten 60% of our money back real early of our investment, so we were all pumped. Kudos to the sponsor, though. He pumped a lot of his own money into that property to keep it afloat, to keep it going. And we were able to sell it for 0% gain. But there wasn't any losses. And so when I talk to people, they are businesses. Bad things can happen.
man, that's tough, but I appreciate you sharing that, right? Because there are obviously these wins that are phenomenal. We love the wins. We love highlighting the wins, but we also have those lowlights as well. And I think it's important for people to understand that there's always risk whenever you're doing an investment. My
Yeah.
question for you is, as you look back on that deal, and obviously fires and things like this, people can't really predict those things. But when you look back on that deal, what do you think you could have done differently, or you would have done differently if you had the chance to invest in a similar deal
Yeah.
like that today?
Well, lesson learned in that one for me, a couple of them. Two, first one is my mentor told me, Randy, don't buy a flat roof chiller boiler property. And I ignored that advice because I was so hungry. And we bought this property, and it was a flat roof chiller boiler, 1965 build. And I probably would do it over again if I knew the same outcome was there. But I should have heeded his advice. And then the second lesson learned there is in the due
Why do you
diligence.
say that real quick though? Because I mean, because your point is, I hear people say stuff like that all the time when they do their criteria, right? Why do you like give us some context on the why behind
Yeah.
that feedback?
The context is one old. This is a 1965 building that we bought in 2018. So the context is flat roofs leak. This had a lot of deferred maintenance on it, and chiller boiler properties are very capital intensive. If a boiler goes out, the whole heat goes out in the whole complex, all 139 units. If the chiller goes out, the air conditioning goes out, and you get 139 people without air conditioning in Texas in the middle of summer. You got a lot of angry tenants, and I don't blame them. And it's just very expensive to fix. We were fortunate that none of that happened. Came close a couple of times, but chillers are just very capital intensive. And if you got 139 units and they're all separately got separate HVACs and furnaces in them, one goes down. Versus a chiller boiler property, everybody goes down, and it's a mutiny. That's my lesson learned there.
Yeah, I
And the
just
other,
think it's important to take that in, right? Because I think
yeah,
people hear these things all the time, and it's easy to say, "Oh, okay, yeah, no, no boilers, no chillers, great." And then you see a property that has it, and you're like, "Oh, but this one looks good." And it's just it helps to have the content and the context of why you hear certain advice. And for
right,
people who've done it, I mean, I bought a property that had a boiler and similar to you, and well, guess what? When that boiler has issues, everyone's complaining. You got half the residents complaining it's too hot, half complaining it's not warm enough. And, it's
yeah,
tough to satisfy everyone. And what happens is your property manager is sitting there taking in all these phone calls. And it's really hard to implement the business plan when you're spending all your time,
great point.
fielding these kind of complaints. So just again, things that don't
Yeah,
show up in the spreadsheet, but when you have that real world experience, you understand why people are saying what they're saying about these properties. But you had the
just
second one. I didn't mean to cut you
I
off.
was just going to say, go into something like that. I personally would not do it today. What I know today, that doesn't mean somebody else in your listening audience shouldn't. But as we would say, just go in with your eyes wide open and educated. And I was going to say the
Exactly.
second takeaway for me in the Beaumont property that we sponsored first was property management. Property management. We have multi-million-dollar assets that are run by a $40,000 or $45,000 a year employee, and they have to be supported by backhouse operations, software, and report writing, and financial statements, et cetera, et cetera. And so we made a mistake in retaining the existing property manager because we did not vet them well enough. And that was a mistake. We should have changed it when we took over the property. But we wanted to be nice and give this company a chance, blah, blah, blah. It simply came to note that they were more of an HOA property manager, not a multifamily. And they truly only had 2 properties as a multifamily that they managed. And so they just, lessons learned. Do your due diligence, ask around the property manager. Not only, are they in that area, but are they in that type of asset? If your property manager is doing all Class A's and you're buying a Class C, I would caution to really challenge that. If your property manager does 150 to 500 doors and you're looking at 60 unit, that's something to really challenge and question about. make sure they know your business, what you want to get out of it. You're smiling. You've got a story too.
Oh, we can keep doing this all day. So, but yes, I will say this though. Those are great words, and it is insanely important to hire the right property manager for the right property. And just because someone's qualified and highly recommended and they're good and they got great references and pretty pictures and all that stuff does not make them the right person for that property. The one story I'll share very quickly is I learned this on my 8 unit, which was my first commercial property. I hired a company that was good, really liked the company. What I did not realize is that my property was more of a C plus property, and their experience was more B plus A type properties. So when it came to managing the residents, fielding phone calls, things like that, there was a bit of a gap from what they were used to doing and what they were really equipped to do. They were just used to working with white collar, residents who worked a, good job downtown Chicago type thing. And they just came to their nice, place in whatever hip neighborhood, versus my, C-class area where we had a lot of working families and some didn't speak English, and it was just a different vibe. And you just learn that you've got to take that property. And even though this company is really good, it doesn't discredit them in what they do, but they may not be the right fit for the property you have. And I would say the same thing with the business plan. If you got a property that's 50% vacant and you're trying to quickly ramp it up and you need construction and contractors and all that stuff, well, you need to make sure you're working with a company that has experience turning, a distressed asset and getting it fully operational versus someone who, they just do really good with stabilized properties. So those are things that are tough. And depending on the market, when you're in a small market, it's kind of tough because most of the time they may not even have that kind of experience. But if you're in a larger city, then yeah, you can find property managers who may have the kind of experience you're looking for. But just to your point, you got to marry the two. You've got to figure out, hey, as you're hiring, you got to get the right people for the right job and recognize that there's likely going to be some gaps because it's just really tough to find the perfect person. So if you could find something that works and they have relevant experience and they can demonstrate the ability, that's where I think you want to move forward. So yeah. Randy, you gave some great, you got some great stuff here, and it looks like you've got, just great background and love what you've been sharing so far. For people who want to learn a little bit more about you and kind of what you're working on or Invest Ark, what's the best way to reach out?
Well, John, thanks. The easiest way is my webpage, invest, INVEST -ARK. That's invest-ARK.com. There's a contact us. I'd love to talk to any of your listeners, anything real estate wise, and help them on their journey.
No, I appreciate that. We'll make sure we link to that in our show notes. Let's jump into our round of insights. All right. Okay. Now we've talked a little bit about this. Maybe you could go into more, but give me a failure or an apparent failure that set you up for later success.
Failure. Well, we've talked about the Longfellow property, which was certainly a failure and then a later success. I would say the one for me is an apparent failure is myself. When I started wanting to be the GP, I was going to be 3 properties a year for 3 or 4 years, and that didn't happen. I found there's a lot of work there, and that I didn't have the ability to commit that, to get away from the office and go see a property in Phoenix or Dallas or wherever. So, but you readjust your priorities, and so that's when I started to look more. And the problem is today everybody compares themselves to social media giant. Maybe it's Rod Khleif in my mind with 5,000 doors and gazillions of dollars. But compare yourself to Randy or John. Back to your goals. So it may have been a failure in some people's mind that I said I wanted to have that number of doors, but I didn't have them. But I just modified my plan, did more passive investing, and I made really decent money. And now did a 400 unit in November and doing a 60 unit now in February, and got some momentum going.
I love it. Great advice there. Give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
I I work with some younger guys who have really gotten me educated on that. So we use a lot of Slack as a great communication tool. You probably heard of, especially, in the remote world with people and partners and everybody all around. Slack's a great communication tool. We use Monday for tasks, and we have virtuals that do a lot of work for us. And so Monday is a great task one there. And then recently, as a sponsor, I've gotten really connected with a company by the name of Invest Next, not to be confused with Invest Ark, but Invest Next is a CRM and investor portal that I really like, and we've done our last deal there on that one, which is very beneficial.
All right. Give me the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year.
I haven't gifted it yet, but I'm going to hold it up here because What Every Investor Needs to Know About Cash Flow and 36 Other Ones by Frank Gialinelli. I'm butchering that, but I'll hold it up there. Really like it. It's one that was recommended to me by a colleague, and it goes into a lot of if you're a numbers type of person, you need that book. It is the basics and puts it all in a simple, easily readable format.
Finance background comes back around, right?
What you gravitate towards.
What's the daily habit that keeps you focused on your goals?
Well, that one's easy for me. They're pinned up right here in front of me. So I'm a real big believer that you need to write your goals on paper and tell other people about them. Tell your spouse, tell your loved one, put them in front of you so they're daily reminders. And then I try to say, okay, there's the annual goal. I want to 3x my investor database. So I got to make 2 or 3 touches every week to do that. So who am I going to touch this week? So breaking the macro down into the micro.
What's your number one insight for investing?
Number one insight for investing. I got a couple of them, but I'll say slow and steady wins the race. So persistence, stay in the game, however you want to label it.
Love it. All right. You mentioned that you are in Houston, Texas, one of the hottest markets in the country. Give me your favorite place to grab a bite to eat.
That's one I've never been asked before. That's great. So I think I told you I'm from the great state of Ohio, and I came down here 9 years ago, and I had never heard the term foodie before coming to Houston. And what the heck is a foodie? Well, it's really connoisseur of foods. I'll call it a food snob. Somebody who really. And so from that, when people ask me that question, I say, well, in Houston, I came from the Cleveland, Ohio market, and I'd say in Houston, I say, well, tell me what kind of genre of food you want, then I'll give you my favorite place. So are you talking Greek? Mediterranean, Tex-Mex, steak, because there are just so many of them in Houston that I really am going to defer that question to say, I can't give you just one. I really have a list of 5 different categories of food places I like to frequent. So I'm a connoisseur of burgers, and I got I would probably put the Athletic Club of Houston. I really want to say is they have one of the greatest burgers I've ever had.
Awesome. There you go, man. Lots of good food options in Houston for sure. And another fellow Clevelander. So always good to connect with my fellow Cleveland folks. And listen, I really enjoyed our conversation. I think you gave us some really good insight of what it takes to go from, one, being a full-time, or having a full-time job, investing, growing as an LP, then transitioning to being a general partner. And then just really some of the realities of the challenges you face, the successes, of course, but also the lessons learned. And I thought it was really cool, too, learning about why you've transitioned from one group to the next group, because it's important for us to understand that this is really all about growth. This is about you growing your portfolio, but also growing as a person. And what you needed when you started out may not be what you need today. The podcast I listened to when I was first getting into real estate are not the podcast I listen to now. The events, the people I surround myself with, all that changes. So it's okay to evolve. It's okay to change your scene and do something different so you can continue to scale and grow and get the fulfillment you're looking for. So I just appreciate you sharing a little bit more about your journey, the steps you've taken, the partnerships, the lessons learned there. And I hope many of our listeners get some great insights from your story to help them with their own investing journey. I want to thank you again for coming on the show, Randy. Let's make sure we stay in touch, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.
John, thanks so much for the opportunity.